Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some really fascinating stuff to get into today. You sent us some excerpts from Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money, and, well, we're ready to dive in.
Yeah, should be fun.
Absolutely. It's all about exploring those hidden forces that shape how we make decisions with our money, those surprising factors that go way beyond just, like, the numbers.
Right, it's not just about crunching numbers, is it?
Exactly. It's more about the psychology of it all. And get this, Housel actually argues that understanding this psychology of money can be even more important than mastering spreadsheets.
Wow, I could see why you were so excited about this one.
He uses some really captivating stories and examples to kind of like drive this point home.
Well, give us a taste. What kind of stories are we talking about here?
Okay, so one of the most powerful ideas he presents, and this one really resonated with me, is that everyone's financial decisions, like they make perfect sense to them at the time, shaped by their own experiences.
That makes sense. We all come from different backgrounds, different perspectives.
Exactly. It's like everyone's playing their own money game with a different set of rules.
So someone who, let's say, lived through the crazy inflation of the 70s, they might see bonds totally differently than someone who's, younger, or someone who's only known stable prices.
That's exactly what he's saying. Their perception of risk, how they think about rewards, even what they consider safe, it's all colored by those past experiences. And this, of course, leads to decisions that, might seem irrational to someone else.
Right. But to them, in their own, financial framework, it makes perfect sense.
And Housel uses a great example to illustrate this. He talks about lottery tickets.
Interesting. Okay, so on the surface, those are like terrible odds. You're practically guaranteed to lose money, right?
Right, but for someone who's always struggled financially, that tiny glimmer of hope, that chance of winning big, it represents something much bigger to them.
It's that dream of a life-changing event, a way out.
Exactly. So you can't really judge someone's financial choices without, understanding their backstory, their hopes, fears, their unique, financial DNA.
I like that. Financial DNA. It's like we each have our own unique financial blueprint.
And speaking of unique financial DNA, Housel talks about Bill Gates,
Oh,
Microsoft,
yeah, fascinating story. What about him?
and how having access to computers at that fancy lakeside school way back in the 60s played a huge role in, his success. He was one of the few kids back then with that kind of opportunity. Talk about a lucky break.
Oh, for sure. That amplified his natural talent, that's for sure. It highlights how luck and risk often operate behind the scenes, right? Shaping outcome in ways we don't even, acknowledge.
We tend to see success and think, oh, I just need to copy what they did.
Right, without recognizing all those invisible forces at play, like the timing, the circumstances.
So even if we perfectly replicated Bill Gates's work ethic, his brilliance,
Could we guarantee the same outcome? Probably not. I mean, we wouldn't have been in the same place at the same time with those same lucky breaks, right?
it's humbling, isn't it?
It is. Recognizing that success isn't always a direct result of just, merit. Sometimes it's about being in the right place at the right time, seizing the opportunity.
And this idea that we can't control everything, that luck plays a role, makes me think about another point Housel brings up, this concept of enough.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Like, even with all the money in the world, it seems like that goalpost often keeps moving, doesn't it?
Always chasing that next thing, comparing yourself to someone richer.
It reminds me of that story about, what was his name? Rajat Gupta.
Oh, yeah, the Goldman Sachs guy, right?
Yes, hundreds of millions of dollars, but it still wasn't enough. And he got caught up in that insider trading thing, went to prison, destroyed his reputation.
Really highlights the danger of chasing more and losing sight of, what matters.
True wealth isn't just about, your bank account.
No, it's not. It's about finding contentment, aligning your financial goals with your values, figuring out what enough actually means to you. That's a tough one.
Okay, so let's change gears a bit and talk about this concept of compounding. Now, I'll admit, when I first read about it, it sounded kind of,
Boring.
yeah, really boring. But Housel explains it in a way that suddenly makes you understand why Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's like this secret weapon for building wealth, but most people just ignore it. Why? Because it takes time.
Patience isn't always our strong suit.
No, it's not. So think about this. Imagine a snowball, right? You start small, and as you roll that snowball down a hill, it gathers more and more snow, growing bigger and bigger.
Exponentially larger over time.
You got it. It's not about getting rich quick. It's about slow and steady growth.
Playing the long game.
Like Warren Buffett, Housel highlights how he's made most of his billions after turning 50.
Wow, he's like the poster child for compounding. His secret, decades of disciplined investing, letting those returns compound year after year.
It's mind-blowing when you realize that, almost all his wealth came from just sticking with it, being patient.
It's like Housel's analogy about hard drive storage. For years, growth was minimum, and then, boom, suddenly capacity explodes.
The key is consistency.
Right, we get so caught up wanting quick results, quick fixes.
We want that instant gratification.
Exactly, and we miss out on the incredible power of, just letting things grow gradually.
Like a tree putting down roots. Slowly but surely, it reaches for the sky.
But of course, things don't always go as planned, right? Housel contrasts Buffett's story with Jesse Livermore.
Oh, the legendary trader.
Yeah, he made a killing betting against the 1929 crash, but ultimately lost it all.
What happened there? I mean, the guy was brilliant.
Well, it's a cautionary tale, right? Even with incredible skill, success can breed this overconfidence. It can lead you to take bigger risks.
Until, eventually,
The house of cards collapses. It's a balancing act. You need to be bold enough to take calculated risks, but also have the discipline to know when to pull back.
when to, like, not get carried away.
Exactly, to recognize when your emotions are driving the bus. And that brings us to this concept of doing nothing.
Doing nothing. Okay, that sounds interesting.
Housel quotes Charlie Munger, Buffett's right-hand man. He famously said that, and I quote, "All there is to investing is picking good stocks at a sensible price and then sitting on your ass."
He said that. Wow.
Yeah, and there's a lot of wisdom in that. It's about resisting that urge to constantly tinker, to chase the next hot stock or time the market perfectly.
Sometimes the best move is no move at all.
Just stay the course, ride out the market fluctuations. Have faith that in the long run, things will even out.
It's like surfers riding a wave. They don't fight against the current. They use it to their advantage. They flow with the energy of the ocean.
Beautiful analogy.
And it reminds me of Housel's point about room for error. We should always have that cushion, financially and emotionally, to weather those storms.
Absolutely. Like expert blackjack players. They might tilt the odds in their favor, but they never bet everything because, well, they know they could be wrong.
You never know what's going to happen.
Exactly. And this brings us to another crucial point. We're emotional creatures, not spreadsheets.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Housel argues that it's okay to not be perfectly rational with money. Aiming for reasonable is more sustainable and probably better for our mental health.
So it's like acknowledging that we're human, that we make mistakes and our emotions, influence our decisions.
And that's okay. It's about finding that balance between logic and psychology, recognizing that sometimes the most rational financial decision, well,
might not be the best one for our overall well-being. It's not just about the numbers.
right, like those academic studies that show the benefits of using leverage in investing.
You mean debt, right?
Yeah, debt. So mathematically it makes sense. But in the real world, most people just can't handle the emotional roller coaster of, seeing their portfolio potentially wiped out.
Even as the math works out in the long run.
Exactly. And that's where Housel's idea of framing market volatility as a fee comes in. Think of it like the price of admission to Disneyland.
Okay, I like this analogy. Go on.
You're not forced to pay it, just like you're not forced to go to Disneyland. There are, lower return, less volatile options out there.
Right, safer rides, but maybe less exciting.
But the question is, are those potential long-term gains worth the emotional roller coaster? Are you willing to pay the price of admission?
So instead of freaking out about every market dip, we should think of it as part of the deal, the cost of potentially getting those gains down the road.
Exactly. Shift your perspective. Volatility is just part of the game.
Part of the fun, even.
And that brings us to this idea that, everyone's playing a different game. Investors with different time horizons are going to make decisions that might seem, well, crazy to others.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like someone who's 25 and investing for retirement is going to have a very different approach than someone who's, 60.
Exactly. Like during the dot-com bubble.
Oh, yeah, that was wild.
Some investors were just playing a short-term momentum game, fully aware it might crash, while others thought, this is it, I'm getting in on the ground floor of something huge.
Both could be valid, right? Depending on their goals.
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to finance. What works for one person at one point in their life might be a disaster for someone else.
We need to figure out what game we're playing and play it well.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about luck, risk, and how our own psychology, plays into our money decisions. But Housel also brings up some interesting external factors, things that can shape our financial choices.
Oh, like what?
Well, he starts with the allure of pessimism.
Pessimism. You mean why we're so drawn to, like, doom and gloom predictions?
Yeah, even when history shows that, things usually work out in the end. Why is that?
Well, for one thing, we're wired to focus on threats. It's how we survived. Our brains are constantly scanning for danger, and bad news just grabs our attention.
Makes sense. I mean, think about it. Which headline are you more likely to click on?
Economy stable or economy on verge of collapse?
Yeah, probably the second one. It's just more attention grabbing.
Housel uses the example of Professor Igor Panarin.
I don't think I know that one.
Back in 2008, he predicted the U.S. would break up in 2010. Didn't happen, obviously.
Okay, so he was wrong, but
But his prediction got a lot of attention because it fed into those fears.
people love a good apocalypse story.
It's fascinating how these pessimists, they often extrapolate current trends without taking into account human adaptability.
That we're too good at solving problems.
Exactly. Just because things are bad now doesn't mean they'll stay bad forever.
Which brings us to the power of narrative.
Ah, yes, the stories we tell ourselves.
Housel points out that our financial decisions are often driven by stories, not just numbers. He uses the 2008 financial crisis as an example.
Right, that was a big one. And a great example.
The underlying economic capacity was largely intact, he says. But a shift in the narrative about housing, about finance, triggered a collapse in confidence, and that, of course, led to less spending.
People get scared. They pull back. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So it wasn't just about those subprime mortgages. It was about how we perceived the economy, the story we told ourselves.
The stories we tell ourselves can have real-world consequences.
It highlights how fragile things can be, how much our systems rely on, like trust and a shared belief. And it makes you realize how important it is to be aware of those narratives that are shaping our decisions.
Consciously and unconsciously, right?
Exactly. Before we wrap up this first part of our dive,
Yeah,
I thought it might be interesting to share a bit about my own financial philosophy.
I'd like to hear that.
I feel like being transparent about my own journey helps me connect with these concepts on a deeper level. What's really driving my decisions these days is this desire for independence, control over my time.
Makes sense. That resonates with a lot of people, wouldn't you say?
It's about financial freedom, being able to make choices that align with your values, not just your bank balance.
Absolutely.
It's why, for example, my partner and I chose to own our home outright.
Even though it might not have been the most financially savvy move from a pure numbers perspective.
Yeah, probably not, but we prioritized peace of mind, that freedom.
It's like you're willing to pay a premium for that sense of security, autonomy.
Knowing we don't have to work to pay the mortgage, that feeling is priceless.
It frees you up to pursue your passions, take risks, live life on your own terms.
And that speaks to this bigger point about aligning your financial decisions with your values, right? It's not just about accumulating wealth. It's about using money as a tool to create the life you love.
Beautiful said.
And that's what I love about exploring this whole psychology of money thing.
It helps us unpack those beliefs, right? Those hidden forces that are driving our choices.
It's like becoming aware of the code that's running in the background, giving us the power to rewrite it to create a financial life that reflects our values and supports the life we truly want to live.
That's the dream, right?
It is.
Welcome back. We're continuing our deep dive into the psychology of money and all those often hidden forces that shape our financial decisions. It's really fascinating stuff.
You know what's really cool? It's how Housel brings history into the mix, like showing how these big trends over time have impacted, well, how we see money today.
Yeah, what we consider normal.
Exactly.
It's like understanding the financial DNA of our society. He talks about the rise of the American consumer
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
and how that story is so intertwined with the events of the 20th century. Starting with that post-World War II optimism
The boon years.
to the big economic shifts of the 70s and beyond.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. After World War II, America was in this really unique position.
Yeah, our industrial base was basically intact.
While Europe and Japan were rebuilding.
Right, and we had billions of soldiers returning home, and there was this urgent need to prevent the economy from slipping back into a depression.
So the focus shifted to creating jobs, stimulating spending.
The birth of the American dream as we know it, right? That idea that, well, everyone could have a house, a car, all the modern conveniences.
And how did they make that happen?
Credit, easy access to credit. Consumer debt became much more acceptable. People embraced that buy now, pay later mentality.
It was like a new way of thinking about money.
It was. And it worked for a while. Wages were rising. The gap between rich and poor, it was actually shrinking.
But then, as Housel points out, things started to shift in the 70s. Recessions hit, inflation, those crazy high interest rates.
And you had global competition increasing as other countries rebuilt their economies.
Right, things got more complicated.
They did. And while the economy continued to grow, that growth became more uneven. The gap between rich and poor started to widen again. And the middle class, well, they started to feel squeezed.
Like their expectations about their lifestyle, about what they deserved, it didn't quite match up with the changing economic reality.
That's exactly it. We were holding on to this idea of a broad, thriving middle class, even as the ground was shifting beneath our feet. And that disconnect, he argues, has fueled a lot of the social and political tensions we see today.
It's kind of unsettling when you think about it.
It is. Makes you think of those images from the Great Depression, right? Breadlines, families losing their homes.
It's a reminder that economic stability, well, it's not always a given.
And those stories we tell ourselves about prosperity, well, they can sometimes mask those underlying vulnerabilities.
Okay, so bringing back to personal finance, this is where having that solid financial foundation becomes so important, right? That margin of safety Housel keeps talking about, it's like having a buffer, a cushion to help you weather those unexpected storms.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial point, understanding risk.
Risk, isn't that just about like looking at the numbers, calculating probabilities?
It's more than that. Housel emphasizes the psychology of risk, how we perceive it, how we react to it,
Oh, I see. Our feelings about risk.
and how those perceptions influence our decisions, often in ways we don't even realize. He starts with this crazy story about a German tank unit during World War II.
A tank unit. What does that have to do with personal finance?
Well, these tanks, they were practically useless because, get this, mice had chewed through the wiring while they were sitting idle.
Mice. Seriously.
Yeah, talk about an unexpected risk. It shows you that we can't anticipate everything. Sometimes the things we least expect, those are the things that have the biggest impact.
The things that catch you off guard.
Like those black swan events, they seem to come out of nowhere and shake up the whole system.
Like, who would have thought about, mouse-proofing a tank?
Right.
It reminds me of that scene in Jurassic Park. Remember when the fences go down?
Oh, yeah, because someone forgot to reboot the system.
One little oversight and chaos.
Exactly. And that leads to Housel's point about single points of failure. If you have all your eggs in one basket and that basket breaks, well,
You're in trouble.
right. So diversification, it's not just about maximizing returns.
It's about spreading the risk, making sure you're not overly exposed to one particular thing.
Like having the backup generator when the power goes out.
That's a good way to put it. And it ties into having that room for error, that financial cushion we talk about.
It's about being prepared, having the emotional resilience to, handle those curveballs when they come your way.
Because they always come, don't they?
They do.
You can't predict the future. No matter how many experts you talk to, how much data you analyze, there's always that element of uncertainty.
Housel even quotes Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, who said that the correct lesson to learn from surprises is that the world is surprising.
We think we have it figured out, and then...
And then life throws us a curveball.
So instead of trying to, predict everything, we should just accept that there will be surprises, build flexibility into our plans, be ready to adjust course.
Exactly. And this goes back to that idea that there's a difference between being rational and being reasonable, something Housel explores in depth. A purely rational approach, it often focuses on maximizing returns, minimizing risks, following a strict set of rules. But remember,
We're human.
we're not robots. We have emotions. And our decisions are influenced by a whole range of factors.
It reminds me of what we talked about earlier, how our past experiences shape how we view money. Someone who grew up during, let's say, a period of economic instability, they might be much more risk-averse, even if, on paper, the numbers suggest being more bold.
Perfect example. So being reasonable, it means acknowledging those emotional realities, understanding our own limitations, making decisions that, align with our risk tolerance and our overall well-being.
So it's okay to prioritize peace of mind over, trying to squeeze out those extra few percentage points of return.
Absolutely. It's recognizing that financial decisions, they're not made in a vacuum.
They're intertwined with our emotions, our values, our life experiences.
Beautifully put. And this leads to this interesting idea that we should, well, love our investments.
Love our investments. Okay, I'm not sure if I follow you on that one.
It might seem a little counterintuitive, but Housel argues that if you're passionate about a company, their mission, their products, you're more likely to kind of stick with them through the ups and downs.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. It's like being a fan of a sports team. You might be disappointed if they lose a few games, but you're not going to abandon them.
Because you believe in the team, you believe in the coach, you trust their long-term vision.
And that same thinking applies to investing.
It can. If you're just chasing returns, you're more likely to jump ship when things get rough. But if you genuinely believe in what a company is doing, you're more likely to ride out that storm and reap the rewards later on.
It's like those people who sold their Apple stock back in the early 2000s because they thought, oh, Apple's finished.
If they had just held on,
They would have made a fortune.
Patience, long-term vision, that's the key.
It's about having faith in the underlying value, even when things get a little crazy.
And that brings us back to aligning your financial decisions with your values. It's not just about the numbers. It's about finding investments that, resonate with you, companies or projects that you believe in.
It's like being a conscious consumer, but with your money.
Exactly.
This has been quite a journey. We've talked about personal stories, history, the whole psychology of risk, and how to make decisions that, well, that actually makes sense for us. What other gems does Housel have in store for us in the last part? Welcome back to the deep dive. It's time to wrap up our exploration of the psychology of money. I'm still kind of blown away by how much of financial success really comes down to, mindset.
Yeah, understanding all those hidden forces that shape our decisions.
It's not just about, being good at math or
It's
anything.
about mastering your money mind.
Exactly. And one of the most, I don't know, mind-bending ideas Housel talks about is that, well, we're all playing a different game. In the financial world, I mean.
Different players, different rules.
It explains why what looks like a genius move to one person could be a total disaster for someone else.
Right, we're all on different playing fields with different goals, different timelines. Someone investing for retirement in 30 years is going to make different choices than someone who's like trying to buy a house next year.
He uses the dot-com bubble as an
Oh
example.
yeah, that's a good one.
Some investors were just riding that, short-term wave, fully aware that it might all come crashing down.
Hope we get out before it did.
While others were like, this is it, I'm getting in on the ground floor of a revolution. They thought it would change the world.
And both, of course, just could make sense, right? Depending on their goals and their risk tolerance.
The problem is when we just blindly follow the crowd or assume everyone's playing by, the same rules. So how do we avoid getting caught up in that?
How do we make sure we're playing the right game?
Yeah, how do we avoid those waves of, hype or fear?
Housel offers a pretty powerful antidote. Focus on what you can control.
I like that. Simple but powerful.
It's easy to get distracted by all the noise, all the things we can't predict.
The what ifs.
But at the end of the day, our energy is best spent focusing on the things we can actually influence.
Like our spending habits.
Our savings rate.
Yeah, Housel really emphasizes that saving isn't just about accumulating wealth. It's about creating options, flexibility.
It's about freedom, isn't it?
It is, like having that emergency fund that lets you, sleep soundly at night, knowing you can handle whatever comes your way.
He also talks about minimized fees.
Oh, yeah. Fees, those can really sneak up on you.
They do. Even those small percentages can make a big difference over time.
It's like death by 1,000 cuts.
You don't even realize how much it's costing you until it's too late. Like a tiny leak in your boat. You might not notice it at first, but it can sink the whole ship.
So be mindful of those fees, right? Whether it's, for investment management or just your bank account.
Every dollar you save on fees is a dollar that can be working for you.
Compounding.
Exactly.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. The power of personal stories, the historical stuff, the psychology of risk. What key takeaways would you leave our listener with?
I think one of the most important things to remember is that financial success, it's not just about numbers. It's about understanding yourself, your own psychology. It's about managing your emotions, having that patience and discipline to stick with, a plan.
A plan that works for you, not for, your neighbor or your brother-in-law.
Right. It's about creating a financial life that reflects your values.
And supports the life you want to live. It's not just about, getting rich. It's about freedom, purpose, fulfillment.
Well said. And remember, this deep dive, it was just the beginning.
Keep exploring these ideas. Keep asking those tough questions.
And keep learning, because ultimately a deeper understanding of, all the forces at play, well, it can lead to better decisions that empower you to live a richer, more meaningful life.
That's what it's all about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for that financial life that truly aligns with your values and your aspirations.
And remember, stay curious. CGV.